This is Rick Malone for the San Francisco Symphony. In the 18th and 19th centuries, anyone who had any pretensions of being an artist took the pilgrimage to Italy. In European society, Italy was seen as the cradle of civilization and the inspiration for all things artistic. Mozart, Mendelssohn, Tchaikovsky, and Sibelius all made the trip on their own. Others like Berlioz, Gounod, Bizet, and Debussy were sent when they won the Prix de Rome, which was France's highest artistic prize. The works they produced as a direct result of their trips make an impressive list, but not all tried to capture the flavor of Italy and its people in their music. Other than Mendelssohn's Fourth Symphony, the one that probably comes closest to sounding Italian was written by the 22-year-old Richard Strauss, and as with many of his works, it was a revelation to some and an outrage to others. Strauss took his trip to Italy while he was between jobs. When he was 19, he'd been hired by the eminent conductor Hans von Bülow as his assistant at the Meiningen Court Orchestra. It was an incredible opportunity for Strauss to learn on the job, both as conductor and composer, especially when von Bülow suddenly retired a few weeks later and passed his baton, literally and figuratively, to Strauss. But the orchestra's royal patron was not as impressed and began withdrawing his support for the orchestra, so Strauss began a job search that ended with his appointment to the Munich Court Opera. In the couple of months between Meiningen and Munich, he went to Italy. Strauss traveled all around the country, Verona, Bologna, Rome, Naples, and Florence, visiting as many concerts, museums, architectural treasures, and archaeological ruins as he could, and generally falling under the spell of Italy and Italians. When he returned to Munich, he went right to work. He called the finished piece Aus Italien, from Italy, and referred to it as a symphonic fantasy. It wasn't quite a symphony, but it was more than a symphonic poem. He wouldn't begin to revolutionize that genre of music for another 2 or 3 years. But that was definitely the direction he was heading with this work. Up to this point, Strauss had been viewed as a kind of young Brahms, firmly in the camp of absolute music, as opposed to those following the music dramas of Wagner or the programmatic tone poems of Liszt. Strauss later wrote in his memoirs, "New ideas must search for new forms." This basic principle of Liszt's symphonic works, in which the poetic idea was really the formative element, became henceforward the guiding principle for my own symphonic work. End quote. Whether Aus Italien is a symphony, a fantasy, or a tone poem, at heart it's a musical travelogue, with each stop marked by a change in tempo or a change in character. Strauss's first stop is the Roman Campagna and the Baths of Caracalla, the glorious melancholy Campagna, as he described it in a letter to von Bülow. In the same letter, he wrote, "I have never really believed in inspiration through the beauty of nature, but in the Roman ruins I learnt better, for ideas just came flying to me." End quote. There's a sweet extended melody in the strings as nature begins to open up to him. The tempo picks up as the sun rises. Strauss describes his awe at standing in the middle of the eternal city. Before the movement comes to a tranquil finish. Strauss subtitled the second movement "In the Ruins of Rome." And on the first page, he adds the description, "Fantastic shapes of vanished glory, feelings of melancholy in the sunny present." End quote. Throughout the movement, Strauss thickens the texture by dividing his string section into 9 discrete parts. That string sound would be one of his trademarks throughout his career. The third movement starts mysteriously. With more divided strings, and violins and flutes injecting little arabesques and filigrees that summon up the vision of sunlight reflecting on the Mediterranean waves. Claude Debussy was one of the first important musicians to praise Aus Italien, and this was actually one of his favorite parts. Strauss also shows off the gift for melody, which would be such a big part of his operas later on in his career. Opera, after all, has always been the supremely Italian musical genre. At the very end of the movement, Strauss tries some more gestures that would show up in his later works. There's a passage that almost sounds like a patriotic hymn. And a moment when the melody suddenly modulates away from the home key of A major, threatening to send the movement to a distant harmonic space. But it turns out to be a tease. The harmony easily finds its way back for a pastoral ending. The folk dance that Felix Mendelssohn used for the finale of his Italian symphony was completely original, but Strauss used a tune that was already popular for his. It's the Neapolitan song Funiculi Funicola, written just 6 years earlier for the opening of the first funicular cable car up Mount Vesuvius. Strauss builds it up, around, and into a high-spirited tarantella. At one point, things start to sound like they're going off the rails. Maybe a little too much red wine here, but with Strauss, things never get too far afield. In his letter to von Bülow after the premiere, Strauss described the audience's response. After the finale, lively booing broke out in the hall. But anyway, this was then drowned out by applause. It amused me all the same, and I was immediately proud. This is the first work of mine to have met with opposition from the mob, so it must be of some importance. The first step towards independence." End quote. This is Rick Malone for the San Francisco Symphony.